go with our science critic. And here we have another person who has problems with semantics, word salad. Let's see what he's got to say. And he's going to say here essentially that science is about winning arguments. Winning arguments? In other words, you have a discussion with someone else, and if you win the argument, maybe because you beat them up finally, then you're a scientist. That's more or less what he's saying, okay? And of course, if science is like law, where you have a prosecutor who's trying to convince the jury, lawyer out there, well, then you're going to need evidence, right? That's one of the issues that you're going to present. And the other one is that you're not going to allow the defendant or the defense attorney there to change the words, the meaning of words, because you're going to accuse them and say, oh, you're changing the meaning of the words, instead of murder, you call it manslaughter. You change the definition here on us, right? And so, yeah, then you're going to win the case just because you changed the definition of some word. So are we not allowed to change definitions, especially if the traditional one that we use, the one in ordinary speech, is irrational and cannot be used in physics? We're not allowed to change that? It stays like that forever because that's the way our forefathers defined it and used it, and that's the etymology of the word, etc. Okay, let's listen to him. Let's see what he's got to say. Here it is, our science critic, fingernails. Okay, give me a second here and put him on. Go. The questions and issues to be addressed in this rebuttal include, is science about winning arguments? And is defining words rationally nothing but a frivolous exercise in semantics?
Bill Gaede is doing the exact same kind of thing that flat earthers do. He's not trying to win the arguments based on evidence. He's trying to win the arguments based on semantics. When you try to redefine the entirety of science to work in your favor, then it becomes a lot easier to win the arguments.
Okay, so science is about winning arguments, and for that you have to present evidence and hopefully change the words on the scientists so that you mix them up and they say, oh, you're not allowed to do that, Bill. You can't change the definitions of words. Those are your definitions. Of course, if you change the definitions, you're going to win the argument. That's the rationale, okay? And so here's kind of like the conclusion of what this fellow said. Science is winning arguments. So I'll let you figure that out if that's what science is about. In other words, science is persuading, convincing, converting, and recruiting. That's what this fellow is essentially saying. Okay, if that's what he thinks science is. And of course, if you're going to do that, if you want to win the argument, of course, you're going to present evidence like they do in law. The prosecutor brings in, the evidence to try to persuade the jury to believe in his side of the case, in his theory, in his, in his argument. And of course, if he changes the definitions, he's got a better chance of winning the arguments. And so it says, oh, Bill, what you're trying to do is change the definition so you can win the argument. Well, we're not into winning arguments. We're here to explain mechanisms so that you understand a new mechanism of how the universe works. And that is that there is no action at a distance, essentially, and that everything in the universe is physically interconnected. All atoms are connected. So that's the assumption. With that, we explain electricity, magnetism, gravity, etc. Okay, and so the issue here is that we define words because they redefine them, right? Because they've never been defined, actually. Not for the purposes of science. They've been defined for the purposes of ordinary speech. The mathematicians bring them into science without any scrutiny. And so they start using these words. Yeah, an object is that which you can see and touch. And they don't even pay attention to what they said. Partly because they don't need objects. They replace every object with a point because they're looking at mass or something else. And so they don't, or a particle, and they say a particle is just a dot. Just imagine a dot flying. It's got mass, it's got charge, whatever. And so they absolutely don't need the objects. And so there are no objects in mathematics, mathematics or mathematical physics for that matter. Neither one has objects. They don't need objects. They work with points, which supposedly are locations, which are not even locations. What they are is positions, and positions in ordered pair, and so on down the line. So it just goes on and on and on. You never have a physical object. Okay, so they never define words because they never needed to define words, not if they're going to give a physical interpretation to their equations. Okay, and so all we have is irrational explanations, physical interpretations today, because all they want to do is win the argument. And when you put them against the wall and say, well, that's irrational, and they say, well, we don't understand it either, but we proved it. Oh, you proved it. How did you prove it? Well, because computers wouldn't work if particles weren't at two places at once. And GPS wouldn't work if we could not bend time. Those are the types of answers you get from them. And so, yeah, we have to redefine these words. We have to find out what these words mean because we're communicating our theories, our physical interpretations. And if physical interpretations are part of philosophy and not a part of physics, why did the so-called mathematical physics, why did he attempt to give a physical interpretation to his equation? I mean, if he stayed completely within his world of numbers and equations and formulas and so on, no problem. He can do whatever he wants in there. But he wants to give a physical interpretation to his equation, for otherwise his equation is irrelevant, has nothing to do with reality. It's just a description and not an explanation.